Greetings and bienvenue, Midnight Crew. Thank you for returning to this broadcast, and welcome to new viewers joining us for the first time. If you like a video, then feel free to subscribe.
What are some of the weirdest abduction stories you've come across? Carl Higdon's story is pretty out there if you haven't read that. In October 1974, with another harsh Wyoming winter on the way and with food prices rising higher than most Americans could afford, 41-year-old Carl Higdon prepared to venture out into the woodlands and wilderness in an attempt to hunt down a large chunk of his family's meat supply for the following few months. He had done so several times before, but with ample space still in the freezer, which had to feed himself, his wife, and 4 children. He ventured out again. On this particular hunting mission, however, things would take a bizarre and otherworldly turn. Higdon's account is one of the most fascinating on record, and one that offers some physical evidence of, at the very least, a strange incident occurring. Furthermore, it is another case that offers details that are found in seemingly unconnected encounters, both across distance and time. Indeed, if there is any truth at all in the account of Carl Higdon, and all indications are that the incident is genuine, then it might offer us some clues as to why the UFO phenomenon exists and why it is so persistent. As the 25th of October began, Carl Higdon was not actually planning to go hunting, at least not initially. He was preparing to go to work as normal when he received a phone call from one of his crew before the afternoon shift. He was sick and wouldn't be into work. Higdon, reasoning that he wouldn't be able to get anything done without his sick crew member, took the day off also. With the afternoon free, he decided to venture out into the Wyoming countryside looking to hunt elk. He would set out to Carbon County and to McCarthy Canyon with his truck packed up for the afternoon. However, along the way, he encountered some fellow hunters who appeared to have trouble with their vehicle. He pulled over to assist the pair and consequently began talking with them. They would inform him of a place deep in the Medicine Bow National Forest, where there were much more elk and where the hunting was much better. It was a remote, little-known spot, but due to his kindness, the stranded hunters were happy to divulge the information to Higdon. Following his getting their vehicle started, he set off again. However, this time he changed his destination. He would now head to the Medicine Bow National Forest instead. It wasn't too far out, he reasoned. He was around 40 miles from his hometown of Rawlings. By the time he arrived at his destination, it was late afternoon, just short of 4 p.m. There was still light, but it was about to go into decline. Upon exiting his truck and preparing his hunting gear, Higdon would spot another fellow hunter, his friend Gary Eaton. The pair spoke for a few minutes before Gary informed him he was going higher into the forest than Higdon, but that he might scare down some elk for him. As his friend went on his way, Higdon made his way to the location the stranded hunters had informed about. As he did, he came across a concealed area behind a hill. It was shortly after entering this area that a sudden burst of movement out of the corner of his eye caught his attention. He focused on his surroundings and spotted a small herd of elk. He was slightly above the elk, 5 of them in total. With his hunting rifle raised, he took aim at one of the animals and fired. However, not only did the kickback from the gun not happen, there was no sound whatsoever. At the same time, Higdon had the end of the rifle in his sights and claims to have witnessed the bullet leave the barrel and travel through the air so slowly it floated like a butterfly. It would eventually drop to the ground about 50 feet in front of him. He suddenly became aware of a painful silence all around him. Not a sound came from anywhere or anything. Higdon could sense a feeling of static electricity that you often get before a fierce thunderstorm. Coming to his senses a little, he stepped forward to retrieve the fallen 7mm bullet. He noticed that the lead part was no longer in the bullet, which itself, or the casing of it, was misshapen considerably. Suddenly, a twig snapped somewhere nearby. Higdon would spin around, immediately seeing the figure in front of him. Thinking it was a fellow hunter, he lowered his gun quickly. As the strange figure emerged from the shadows of the trees, however, he realized something was terribly wrong. The figure was most definitely humanoid and male, but it wasn't human. Higdon would later recall that the figure had no detectable ears, with very small eyes and no eyebrows. He also recalled that his hair was coarse, like straw growing out of his head. It had a slit-like mouth that exposed 3 extremely large human-like teeth. Perhaps most bizarre were the antenna-like objects on each side of its forehead. Higdon would add, no chin was visible. His face just seemed to blend right into his throat. He had no jawbone. He would estimate the mystery male creature to be around 6 foot in height and adorned a one-piece, tight-fitting black suit, similar to a wetsuit scuba divers wear. On the chest were harnesses that crisscrossed each other. The figure also wore a metallic belt with a 6-pointed yellow star where the buckle should have been. Already unnerved and bordering on panic, when Higdon noticed the creature's right arm, it was all he could do to prevent absolute terror from gripping him. Where the hand should have been was a drill-like device attached, or blended, onto the wrist. He looked at the left arm, noticing there was nothing at all on the end of the blunt limb. The creature moved forward, directly approaching Higdon. Bracing himself for the worst, it was a disorientating surprise when the creature asked matter-of-factly, "How you doing?" Already struggling to keep his composure and process what was happening, when the strange creature asked Higdon if he was hungry, it simply threw him even more. Before he could answer the questions, a clear package levitated towards him, seemingly at the commands of the strange visitor. Higdon reached for it. He opened the cellophane-like package, revealing 4 pills inside. The creature told Higdon that one of them would last him 4 days, and he should take one now. Without questioning, Higdon reached for one of the pills, placed it in his mouth and swallowed it. He then placed the package into his pocket. The creature said his name was Also One. As he moved, Higdon became aware of a transparent, cube-shaped object on the ground behind the figure. He would estimate it to be around 5 feet high and wide, and around 7 feet tall. Although he was not told so, Higdon somehow realized this was the strange figure's ship. As if reading his mind, the creature asked him, "Do you want to come along?" Although he didn't specifically answer yes, he must have gestured as much. The next thing he knew, he was inside the cube. Next to him was the Also One. Struggling to understand how they could both fit inside such a small object, Higdon looked around in awe, but still, with a persistent panic bubbling away inside of him. When he noticed the 5 elk were also in the cube with them, his own memories and senses began to become fuzzy. He would recall, though, that they were motionless, paralyzed. It was then he realized he was sat in a chair with bands holding his arms down firmly. He could feel that the craft was lifting off the ground. He also noticed another of the creatures enter the room. It approached him, fitting a bizarre helmet-like object to his head. The underside to the craft was clear, and beneath him, Higdon could see a planet-shaped object similar to a basketball. It was a planet, but it wasn't Earth or any other planet he knew of. They would enter this mysterious world, and although Higdon's memories of it are hazy at best, what he does recall is fascinating. Most prominent in his mind was of a megalithic tower that dwarfed all around it. He would recall that all around this tower were revolving patterns of multicolored lights. The lights were so intense that Higdon couldn't keep his eyes open to look at them. Apparently, unaffected by their guests' discomfort, the figures brought the craft to land at the base of the tower. Higdon could see the alien world through the transparent walls of the craft. He was amazed then that in front of him, outside the craft, were several humans, talking to each other, just as they would on Earth. He claimed there were 2 young girls, one around 11 years old and one in her early teens, a teen couple around 18 years of age, and an older man in his 50s. As he watched this scene outside the ship, his host approached him once more. They were, he claimed, on a planet 163,000 light miles from Earth. Higdon questioned if the creature had meant light years, to which he replied, "The passage of time is different for them." Also One then motioned that they should go, and Higdon was led inside the behemothhic tower. He was taken into an elevator which took them to a room with a platform in the center of it. He was told to stand on the platform. As he moved, he noticed he was not walking, but floating. although he didn't understand how. Upon stepping onto the raised platform, a glassy shield appeared from out of the wall. It stopped in front of Higdon, evidently performing some kind of scan on him. After 5 minutes or so, the shield retracted away from him and back into the wall. Then his host informed him rather bluntly that he was to be taken back to Earth where they had found him, as he didn't suit their purpose. What is extremely interesting about this detail is that just short of a decade later, an elderly gentleman in England named Alfred MITZU would receive almost the exact same response to a similar examination on a landed UFO. It is highly unlikely that MITZU was aware of Higdon's encounter and perhaps endorses what Higdon believes the purpose was: a breeding program. Before he knew it, he was back inside the cube with no real memory of how he had arrived there. He did recall, however, of Auso 1 admiring his primitive weapon before handing him back his rifle. He also, rather bizarrely perhaps, remembers his host informing him that their home planet had no fish in their seas, which was one of the things about Earth that their people most liked. As they prepared to take off, the creature took back the pills as Higdon would now no longer need them. This was his last memory of the cosmic encounter before he found himself back on Earth. Disorientated and on the verge of mentally breaking down, Higdon didn't question how his truck had seemingly been moved several miles from where he had parked it to the spot where he encountered the humanoid creature. When the creature stated to him, "We'll see you," he realized he was floating slightly above the ground. The next thing he knew, the craft was gone, and he was standing on the edge of a rocky cliff edge. Although the drop was only 10 feet or so, he was not prepared for it. When he landed on the ground below, he would sustain considerable injuries. Perhaps he also suffered a concussion in the fall, as his next memory is of struggling along a dirt road, unable to remember what had happened or where he was. He eventually relocated his vehicle, although due to his shredded memory, he didn't realize it was his truck. He was simply using it to take shelter. When a voice came over the CB radio, he quickly picked up the receiver and asked for help. Unsure of his location, he would recall a sign that stated he was at the North Boundary National Forest. A search party would eventually locate him just before midnight. When they did, they were at a loss as to how he had managed to drive the truck there. Furthermore, there were no tire tracks anywhere nearby, despite the muddy ground. And just to add another twist to the whole encounter, as the search party was looking for Higdon, they would encounter strange green, red, and white flashing lights in the skies overhead. Higdon's wife had joined the search effort. However, Higdon at first failed to recognize her. When he finally did respond to the search party, he exclaimed wildly, "They took my elk." Higdon would eventually go with his wife to a patrol car and was taken to the nearest hospital. The rest of the search unit, with great difficulty, eventually managed to remove his truck from its mysterious location. As well as the injuries sustained in the fall, doctors would notice how bloodshot his eyes were. Further tests would reveal more intriguing results, though. His blood, for example, appeared to be enriched with nutrients and vitamins, more so than the average person. Even stranger, scarring on his lungs from exposure to tuberculosis had seemingly disappeared. In short, as Dr. Tongo, who examined him, would state, he's now in A1 super condition. It is hard to imagine that this transformation isn't connected to the encounter. It was the following day when Higdon began to remember the encounter in full. With his consent to do so, the authorities would inform the press of the incident. This, in turn, would attract members of the UFO community, researchers and enthusiasts to seek out Higdon to hear of the mind-bending events. One of those who took an interest in Higdon's case was Leo Sprinkle, who was adept at using hypnotic regression to unlock memories of such encounters. Although much of what occurred was already known to Higdon, the sessions in early November 1974 did manage to reveal some other interesting aspects of the incident, and quite possibly offers us an insight into why such visitations are happening. According to Higdon, the visits to Earth are essentially food-gathering missions. Many of the animals and fish on Earth do not exist anywhere else in the universe. Groups of such animals, such as the elk on this occasion, go to their homeworld for breeding purposes. He also stated again that humans who go to this alien world are there for similar reasons. However, No further information came to mind regarding the particulars or details of the program. Higdon did state, however, that he believed the reason he did not suit their purpose was due to him having had a vasectomy several years previously. Incidentally, Sprinkle would find in his evaluation that Higdon is reporting sincerely the events he experienced. Aside from the bizarrely crumpled bullet that he retained, it is impossible to explain the vanishing of the lung scars that are on his medical record. And then, there is the impossible location of his truck that the search party never could explain how it came to such an inaccessible spot. Several years later in 1978, Higdon underwent a polygraph test. He passed it unquestionably, with the report stating something utterly fantastic did happen in this man's life. The test proves it beyond doubt. The video below looks at this most fascinating case in a little more detail. The link is in the description.
I've never been able to publicly tell this story to my friends and peers because of obvious reasons. Often these stories are bundled within confusing contexts, and that's why I chose to keep it between myself, my ex, my brother, and the therapist I felt forced to see due to the trauma it caused me. To understand the depths of the cracks this real-life first-hand experience caused, you must first know a little bit about me. When I was 7, I had a terrible experience watching Fire in the Sky. The loosely based on a true story at the beginning, followed by the helplessness of a grown man, and his very graphic torture, was a very shocking sight to watch on public afternoon TV. I'm pretty sure it messed up other kids too. A few days later, another TV channel made a spin on the same Travis Walton abduction case. It didn't help that my mother put a hand over my face so that I couldn't watch the story properly. That only worsened my anxiety about the subject matter. I became scared of everything related to aliens and UFOs. I felt a chilling, spine-crawling shock and awe sensation whenever I saw a depiction of a gray alien. In retrospect, I find it curious that no other type of alien was terrifying to me. I was about 10 when I learned through the Discovery Channel that exposure to your fear often helps you deal with it. So I started learning more about ufology. Magazines, websites, documentaries, all that I could. That was how I realized that 99% of the cases were full of shit, made up stories by wackos, or just misinterpreted aerial phenomena. This knowledge made that fear just slowly fade away. By 13 or 14, the dread was gone, but my curiosity remained. I kept studying the subject as a hobby, and often would bring the topic to more open conversation groups. When I was 20, I met the person who would become my girlfriend. She was a freshman at my college. She's a sweet girl from a small town. She's kind, hardworking, and pretty. We had been dating for a few months, and somehow the extraterrestrial subject, which was still on my interest list, came up. She avoids it with a pretty polite refusal. "Yeah, I don't like to talk about this subject. I would rather not. Let's talk about something else." I realized she had the same fear I had when I was younger, so I tried to put some rationality in a narrative that, to me, was already very irrational. There's no need to be upset about it. The chances of having a close encounter are very, very dim. It is easier to be bitten by a shark while being hit by lightning. There's an awkward silence, followed by water filling the bottom half of her eyes. Her fragile, stuttering voice answers, "Yeah, that is just not enough to avoid them from coming at night." Crazy, right? I thought that too. I didn't make anything of it, and I just left-handed it as the fantasies of a young girl from the countryside. I don't really remember how we changed subjects, but we did, and everything went fine. So fine, in fact, that we kept dating. We managed to talk about this upsetting subject a couple of times later on. She told me that sometimes she is visited by humanoids that come in through her apartment window. They appear to be floating outside the 5th floor of the building, with big black eyes and yellow skin. One of them is taller and looks more human-like, but all of them feel evil, as if they don't mean any good to her. I'm annoyed by this, not sure what to think of it. I remember that I discarded the info, as I'd already studied so much about the best UFO and aliens cases, and none of them features a black eyes yellow creature. She's a cutie and certainly not any crazier than anyone I've met. She just has this deep secret nightmare and fantasy. She never spoke about it. Months pass by. She sleeps in my house often, Both of us still lived with our parents, as is common in our country, until we graduate. We usually watch a movie, order some pizza, shower, and sleep together. We don't do drugs and we don't drink alcohol. It's cozy and comfortable and all is right. We do this now and then, about 2 weeks every month. Everything is good. Now, as I've stated before, I've been very interested in aliens and UFOs since I was around 10, but I had never seen or felt anything out of the ordinary. That's when, in late 2011, this event happened. It was around August or September, and for the life of me, I cannot recall the precise date. We were sleeping in my single bed, which was just below my big bedroom window, whose blackout curtains were fully closed. Both of us woke up, very startled and heart racing. It must have been way past midnight. Blinding light is shining through the window that is just above my bed, the single one that leads directly into the street. It makes no sense because the blackout curtains are covering the glass completely, and yet the light just passes through it. This annoying sound keeps echoing in my head, passing through my skull like a nail, drilling my ears with a sound exactly like those 90s tube TV used to make when turning on. I didn't know where it was coming from, nor did it seem important given the blinding brightness I was experiencing. The sound just was there, ringing inside my mind. I jump out of bed and turn around to face the window. My girlfriend is also standing on the other side of the bed, looking at the closed curtains, visibly shaken. With one leg standing with feet on the floor and the other bent over the bed, I reach for the drapery of the curtains that cover the window just above our pillows. At no moment did I have a discernible thought in mind. I was just reacting. In a quick motion, I spread apart the drape to see what is happening outside. The brilliance gets even brighter, engulfing all of the bedroom. I can't see anything, it's simply too bright. It felt as if there was a stadium floodlight just outside the window. In reflex, I use my hand to cover some of the light that stings my eyes a little bit. The framing of the windows is made of wood that connects small 4x6 glass panels, and I sway my head in an attempt to block the source of light in a way that whatever is shining can be better seen or understood, even if a little. I still don't know if my eyes adjusted to the brightness or if the light dimmed gradually, but I was eventually able to see it. This is a Photoshop mock-up of what my perspective was at that moment. At exactly 40 feet from my window, on the other side of the street, just by the curb in front of a gated land lot just below a street lamp, and hovering about 2 or 3 feet above the ground. It was a soft, glowing object that looked like an egg that was turned on its side and made of light. Its glow was a milky white bright in its core, but had a bluish-purplish glow on its outer rim. On the larger side of the egg, I noticed a lump, not big enough to be considered a dome or sphere, but a subtle elliptical protrusion like a callus. It wasn't hovering still. It moved in the same place in a disturbing, flickering pattern, as if it was trying to move on X, Y, and Z axis very, very quickly and in short lengths, as one would portray something that feels either unstable or an engine about to blow up. I've described its movement pattern as film grain. The clarity coming from the light pole just above it made the thing cast a barely visible shadow on the street. I made a mock-up of what I saw. My girlfriend is sobbing intensely in despair, tears running down her face, slobbering. I feel cold in my gut and neck as if my heart stopped. My mind is blank. There's nothing on it. I can only describe it as a dark, empty space. The fear I felt was a void that restrained me, something I had never experienced in my life. It had a familiar metallic phantom smell that a concussion would cause in me. I stood there looking at that, without a single rational response. Just droplets of cold sweat I felt running down my forehead. I felt like a deer must feel watching the headlights of a 10-ton truck aiming at me, not understanding that my fate was sealed, but knowing the hopelessness of it. I wasn't there. I wasn't in control. I was so little, so disempowered, I was nothing. Whatever it was so much more than I. That's when I feel a hand touching my shoulders. It's my girlfriend. There's something wrong with her face. I cannot quite figure out what. I think it is her, but I cannot see her. There is a swirling darkness covering her facial features, almost like a black whirl, a hole seen from above. She is not weeping anymore. Everything is now becoming hazy. She speaks to me very calmly. Close the curtain, let's go to sleep. As if a switch was turned off, those animalistic, raw, unconscious feelings that were pulsating within me disappeared. I still am not thinking, I still am not in control, but I don't feel anything anymore. Slowly I turned towards the window, closed the curtains, lay in bed with my face and belly upwards, and slept instantaneously because the dark came immediately. I don't think I've ever fallen asleep so fast in my life, even less so in such a position. All of these events happened in 15 seconds or 30 seconds. It appeared to be very, very quick. We woke up at the same time on the next day, a Sunday. Something was different. I tried not to make eye contact and realized she was also avoiding it, side-eyeing me. My mind is slower than usual, even for Sunday standards. I still recalled everything and wanted to talk about it, but I didn't quite feel like it. It was on my mind, I remembered it perfectly. The waking up, the brightness, the shutting down, and yet I didn't dwell on it. I rationalized that it's for the better. I don't want to make her feel uncomfortable about sleeping in my house. After 10 minutes, I simply forgot about the whole event, as if it was just another bad dream. But it sure wasn't. My dreams consist of shifting colors, fantastical lengths, and absurdist narratives that make no sense in real life with lots of different people in them. This dream was very real. I woke up and went to sleep within the same dream. I went to sleep and woke up the next morning in the same place. All the colors, textures, and shapes were correspondent to reality. It was just me and the person I went to sleep with, and I could recall it from start to finish. Unsettling, but the experience didn't linger in my mind. It fades as if it didn't happen. To this day, I cannot understand why I felt this apathy towards such a traumatic experience that had just occurred. Fast forward a couple of years or so. It's January 2014. I was watching the morning news and a story came up about a UFO causing the airport in Bremen, Germany to stop all traffic. 2 minutes and 10 seconds mark.
Here's the video from that news broadcast playing depicting an alleged UFO in the sky.
I didn't even remember that I saw something like that and it all came back to me. The entire event is now suddenly a memory. Whatever was filmed in here looks just like the thing I saw outside my bedroom window, but with a bluish outer rim instead of purplish. I feel confused. I decided to talk with my girl about it. She remembers waking up that one night with a very bright light coming through the curtains and the terrible annoying noise. She doesn't remember anything else after that. No strange glowing object, no touching my shoulder, nor telling me to close the curtains, no sleeping. It screwed me up in ways hard to describe. I was unable to look outside my window for weeks because it would make me recall the incident. I had trouble sleeping, often pulling all-nighters and only being able to sleep after sunrise. I got used to waking up several times during the night, feeling I was being watched. The only time in my entire life I've ever prayed was to make the feeling that this thing was still around go away. I can't prove to myself that it was just a weird dream, and I can't prove it was real either. It's an experience that walks between fantasy and reality in the worst possible way, creeping in everything that I do. The lingering feeling of being powerless or doubting myself reappears. I've told this event to my brother. First of all, realistically, that did not happen. What are the chances it happened to you of all people? You who studied UFOs almost your entire life. Secondly, I was sleeping in the bedroom just beside yours. Why didn't you scream, maybe take a picture? I know you would. And lastly, it was a light. I know you. How would just a bright light scare my big brother? He is 100% correct. I keep revisiting this experience year after year after year in hopes of remembering or recovering more information, maybe feeling differently about it. I went and still do therapy because of this trauma. I just cannot let it go. It is as if a pact I made with myself that nothing like this would ever happen was broken, and now I distrust myself. I've read enough on similar cases to believe that there won't ever be an explanation for this event, but I really want a resolution. I really want to overcome it, and I do not know how. My recollection of these events occurred 10 years ago, and nothing remotely similar to this window incident ever happened again. Me and my ex-girlfriend are still friends, and although we both moved to different countries, we sometimes still message each other. More than once I asked her if that really happened. She always replies, "It did. I'm sorry it did. I cannot explain it, but it happened."
The interference with light that UFOs create prevents us from getting clear photographs. The UFOs traveling here are manipulating space around them in a quantum manner. This is why they can suddenly disappear, appear, and pop in and out of visibility. I am not certain on the method they use to perform this bit. I do have numerous theories, however, since this technology is vastly more advanced than our own. I do not believe it is currently possible to understand this technology without the creators explaining them to us. There are also UFOs which use technology to keep themselves cloaked and within an altered quantum state, which can project this type of energy vibrational transference. This means that they can not only phase themselves, they can phase things like people. They can phase you in an essentially ethereal form onto their ship, whilst also having the capability of keeping a copy of you in the same place. There could be multiple different level civilizations interacting with us. However, they haven't enlightened us, so obviously we are not worth it in their eyes. There is an alien civilization which is influencing people, is watching people, and when they will step out of the shadows is unknown. If humans can't come together themselves, why should they interfere? Obviously, we are unworthy of dealing with a civilization of God-like beings in some of their eyes. We are heading towards a future where eventually there will be a divide in the human race. This divide could be argued to have already occurred, where the elite shall rise to even greater heights of power. We are allowing this to happen and have allowed it to happen. Yet, what if an alien species did hear the so-called prayers of the oppressed? What would they do for humanity? This so-called alien species could be monitoring us as well to determine this. Their morals could be and are likely to be different than our own. Yet they come down in the form of the outcasts to test humanity against our own morals. So if we fail both tests, plus numerous other tests, why should we be helped or even allowed to exist if we prove to be a bigger danger to the universe? We are still here, so we are not a threat, I believe, but their non-interference seems to me to show a failure in human belief systems. Their way of life is not something you want brought here. We are humans, and we are not them. For a while I thought no, their interference should never happen. Not after I realized the horrors that they would bring would go against humanity. However, I think that there are those who believe this is only fair, since we preach these beliefs of judgment onto ourselves. For that reason alone we should be condemned, but I also know there are those who preach words of true empathy and live by it. No, we should accept the judgment given since it is our actions that brought us here. A harvest is coming for humanity, and when that harvest comes it is only natural. We are powerless to stop it now, and who knows when it is coming. You better hope that the things surrounding UFOs stay obscure, because then we can continue to live a much more peaceful life.
I'm wondering if anyone out there has ever had an alien abduction. I'll share my story. It's kind of long, so bear with me. Kind of hard to know where to begin, so I'll start from the top. As far as I remember, this happened to me. I was a kid. I don't know, 7 or 8. Not younger that I can remember anything strange, but I would recall waking up in the middle of the night at around that age and smelling something like burnt metal. You know, kind of metallic smell in my nose and huge flashes of light, which was what would wake me up in the first place. I don't remember much else. I do recall this happening one night and went downstairs because I could hear Mum and Dad in the living room watching TV. I walked down to try to talk to them about it, which at this time was probably after the first few times I was happening. They flipped out on me, asking me why I wasn't in my bed when they checked on me, and I got in trouble because my window was open, and they thought I was sneaking outside. I tried to explain to them I was in my bed, but I got grounded for lying. I tried to tell them what was happening, where I was walking up with big flashes of light and a burning smell. Anyway, not much I can remember from there. Flash forward to me being a teenager, think 15 or 16 or so. This part gets weird, so bear with me on this. I stopped having these times in the night when I would wake up with the burning smell and the huge flashes of light. As far as I recall, nothing has happened since I was a kid. Or, I thought so. Anyway, and I'm embarrassed to talk about this part, but I'll give it straight. If you're grossed out, Don't read on. Anyway, I remember being a teen and noticed I was bleeding when I went to pop. I was scared, so I told my mum and we went to the doctor. I thought it may have been some sort of hemorrhoids or something. The doctor noticed some fissures, scratches or something, and just prescribed some meds for it. It didn't work. The blood started to get worse. The next week, Mum took me back in, and we got to see a specialist, and so they did a colonoscopy and found something in my lower intestine. I had to have an operation because it looked to be shredding into my bowel. They got it out, and it was a strange, jagged piece of metal that was logged in there. Anyway, they stitched me back up, and I went home. Now, flash forward to me in my 20s. I've been waking up a lot with night terrors of being on this strange operating table and having a tube of some sort forced down my throat, and I feel it going through my body. I can't see anyone doing this other than light behind them, but they look alien, like bigger heads, and look rather thin in the body. I, now being 30, have woken up with something from time to time outside my window, and I'm on the 10th-floor apartment. There's also metallic tastes in my throat, and my eyes burn, and I smell that burnt metal smell again. This is getting really strange, and wondering if this is alien abduction or if something else is happening to me. I've not went for a psychiatric checkup. I don't know. It's just really strange and freaky that all these things have connected since I was a kid.
I've experienced an alien abduction. They just sort of floated up to my window and asked me to come outside to talk to them. They said they'd answer any questions I wanted to know about. They looked pretty much like the classic Greys, little skinny bald guys with huge heads and big dark eyes. I asked them if they were aliens, and they said that they were controlled by things very far away from Earth. Their physical travel was very limited, but they could send certain signals in higher spatial dimensions to alter human genomes over several generations to create a vessel they could remotely control and observe from. The big skulls were mostly just full of a special electrolyte gel. I asked them what their actual selves were like, and they told me that they were representatives of a collective of different species. Each individual, apparently trillions of them, could take on whatever form they wanted and do nearly anything they wanted. They were all entirely immortal, but taking on that state of existence means entirely giving up the desire to reproduce. They were on Earth because they wanted to collect humans and a couple other terrestrial species to join their community, and they had to make sure the species were relatively safe in the meantime. They've been active on Earth since the early 1800s and have prevented over a dozen nuclear events since then. They told me that Earthlings would gain full access to their abilities once their actual engineers arrived in 30 to 70 years, and that they predicted that around 80% of human minds would immediately collapse and combine afterward. They tried to reassure me that those individuals would still be happy and well-contained afterward, but they admitted it wasn't a phenomenon they could really expect humans to understand. I asked them if they were going to ask for permission, either from individuals or from the population as a whole, and they said that they wouldn't. While they're sympathetic toward other intelligent species, they don't really think that a mortal species with no concept of what they're offering should have any say in it. So they're just going to do it all at once. I asked why they were telling me any of this, and they said they wanted to seed knowledge of their project within certain specific communities. After that, they told me they had to go, and then they just rose up 12 feet in the air, vanished, and there was a big gust of wind. I don't know how much they care about human manners, but I think they were too polite to tell me that they think that a person like me spreading around this info would actually make people less likely to believe it ahead of time, and counteract any risk of leaks in the future. Obviously, I don't have any proof of this besides the fact that I went outside and froze my ass off. But I know what my dreams are like well enough to say that this wasn't one. What do you folks think? Honestly, I'm feeling pretty good about my chances, and I'm not too unhappy about the end of humanity under these circumstances.
I hope that you enjoyed tonight's broadcast. If you enjoyed tonight's story, then please subscribe to the channel, as more green texts will appear daily. A new broadcast will appear when the clock strikes midnight Central Time.
Remember to check the Odyssey and Rumble pages for separate archives of previous broadcasts.